And Donna. Oh, okay, and our recording has begun.
Mm.
Donna, thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you've been working in some very interesting tech spaces for a while from different perspectives. And one concept you've been working with lately has been the superpowers and how to be a superhero with a story. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to that concept?
Yes. So I had been working in tech when I kind of came upon this sort of superhero void and superpower void. I'd been working in tech for about 20 years when I was finding myself working more and more with senior leaders at companies in a consulting capacity. So I would be brought in. The same thing when I was working in-house. I had a product strategy consultancy where I would come in and help businesses uncover the stories behind the products they were building so that they could build more successful products over time. And what started happening is I started working with, not started, but over time, as I was working with more successful companies, with senior leadership at successful companies, what I started finding was that they didn't really have product problems in any typical sense, even if they did, like, actually no one really cared. And so, you're one of the big three tech companies, like, the issue is not, oh, our products are so bad. It's like something else is going on at the point that people were bringing me in. And what I found over time is that it was really people challenges where I could be most useful to companies, helping people collaborate, helping people get along, helping leaders be more effective at leading their teams forward so that they do better work over time. But the work part, it's like everyone already, they were all experts. They were product experts, UX experts, engineering experts, marketing experts, sales experts. No matter who I worked with, these people were experts at their craft. But the people part is really hard to get a handle of. And so what happened was one day I was at one of these companies. I was in um, not Silicon Valley. I was in Palo Alto. It was an annual leadership retreat. And someone pulled me over and was really upfront with me and just point blank said, what I was helping them was, so the book that I wrote for Rosenfeld Media that some of you might have read, I still recommend it. It's a great book. I don't do product work anymore, but the user's journey is all about finding the stories in the products that you work on so that you can build more successful products. I was facilitating a leadership retreat and someone came up to me over lunch and he pulled me aside and he point blank said, and I so appreciate it to this day, he point blank said, I know that you want us to think of our users as heroes, which is my whole premise. Your users, your customers need to be the heroes of their own stories. And the products that they use are like a prop in a story. Like the product is not the hero, your user is a hero, and it's what they could do with your product, whether it be like a presenter remote or an app, software, anything. And yeah, he pulled me over aside and he just said, like, it's great. I know our customers are heroes, but what about me? I don't feel like a hero right now. And how do I feel like a hero? Because if I don't feel like a hero, it doesn't matter how, what happens to our product or our customers. Like, I'm not accomplishing my goals, my team's goals, my organizational goals. And like, that's what I need right now. And I appreciate that he was so blunt with me because, my answer, his question was, well, what about my story? And my answer was, I don't know. And for me, so I'm a researcher at heart. For me, saying I don't know is probably the, the three hardest words ever to say, other than I love you. It's like, oh my God, I don't know. How do you become the hero as a leader? And so, of course, because I'm a researcher at heart, then I spent the next, at this point, it's been 5 years researching this topic. And I ended up in the process changing over my entire business and sunsetting my product strategy consultancy and then moving into people development. And that's what I do now. It's executive coaching, leadership development, and I turn leaders into superheroes. But and I can explain how it works a little bit. The good news is that you use all the skills that everyone here already has today, which is design thinking, agile kind of agility, lean experimentation, all these things that a lot of us already know how to do. If you apply them to yourselves as a leader, that's how you become a superhero. So that's my long answer to your question, Julia.
That was great. And so you mentioned in there that you can get a little bit into the um, the process, or would you like to talk a little bit about how you guide people, just to give people a framework?
Yeah. So the general idea is, well, I'll start with the product side of things. So you can all see where I'm coming from, which is, so I have a film background, and early in my career, what I learned to do with films, I was a documentary filmmaker. So I learned how to take real life and find the story in real life, and then repackage it in a format that people can then understand the story and take meaning from it. And so in my product career over 20 years, I did the same thing in different roles. So my title, I mean, I started in the late 90s. The titles changed every 4 years, I think. But I was always, building products and spearheading product teams. And eventually it moved into, I think my first title was like what was it called? Site builder. No, not site builder. What do we call ourselves? Webmaster in the 90s. And then over time, UX strategy, and then eventually product management, product leadership. But the big gist of it all was, for me, because I take a user-centered approach to it all, is really, what is the story our customers need to have with our products? We find that out through a combination of research, and it's qualitative and quantitative, and prototyping, hypothesis building, experimentation, more data gathering, and then ultimately you come down to what the story can be with your product, and you build that into your process of how your team then imagines products, features, services, content, anything. It's all about turning your users into heroes while also meeting business goals. Because at the end of that story, your users have to meet their goals and the business has to meet their goals. And if you can have the two work in tandem, that's when the magic happens. And so for leadership development, it's the same thing, same approach, which is, you always a good story starts with the end. So you want to know, like, where are you going as a leader? Or if you're trying to figure out your team and how to move your team forward, how to build a high performing team, where is your team ultimately going? And not just that, but like, what kind of impact do you want them to have? Because just saying, I want a high performing team, well, good luck. Like, who cares? For what? Towards what end? I want a team that increases revenue for the business by X. Okay, that's something you can measure. So you always want to start at the end. You work your way back, and then you build conflict in, which makes good stories better. So, okay, what's the problem or challenge that you're facing? Where are any of your like dragons hiding along your journey, because that's going to make your story better and it makes you a better human. And then how ultimately can you bring your story to life? So it's almost like treating yourself as a leader, or your team or your organization as a design project.
That's
Using
great.
data. Data is very important.
And data, we all love data. You actually answered like 3 of my questions in there, so that was very well done. And just to expand on it a little bit, there's a cat climbing on my leg. How is the ability to write and own one's story an essential skill regardless of one's level? Or why is this something we should all embrace today versus someday when I'm more in a leadership role?
Yeah, and I love that question, because this is something, I use the term leader loosely. On the one hand, which is, a leader is anyone who wants to make an impact. On the other hand, in organizations, leaders are people who are actually empowered to make that impact, at least in theory. But anyone could be a leader, whether you manage a team or not, as long as you feel empowered, and that empowerment has to come from you and the system within which you exist. And so the The reason why it's important is like there's a very in the tech world, like things change all the time and goals change and reorgs happen every few months, and it can be kind of chaotic. And so it's really important to always be clear on what do I want to accomplish, whether you're running the show or you're a part of the system. And when you're clear on what you want to accomplish, and there's a lot of science behind the fact that like just having goals will make you more likely to achieve them. And that's a good, I always think in terms of story metaphors, just because that's my background, but a good story has that as well. So if you think of any of your favorite TV shows, the hero is always trying to achieve something, and that's what moves them forward. And so if you are in a leadership position where you technically are a manager or running some kind of large organization, you have to be clear on what your goals are. And then you figure out the story of like, how am I going to get there? And if you're the superhero, what kind of superhero am I? What are my superpowers? And so on and so forth. If you're a key player in that story, you're playing an important piece as well. And so I think of like one of my favorite TV shows, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. You could say it's a show about a character named Buffy and she's a vampire slayer and, she's a superhero and whatever. But if any of you have watched that, it's like, it's actually really about all the other characters, and she plays just a tiny minimal role. And it's very common. I think systems are stories. And when the system is effective and you are a key part of that system, making sure that your goals align with everyone else's goals, that's when the whole organization moves forward. So yeah, everyone needs to be a superhero to make an impact at work.
I love that. And any answer that involves Buffy, I'm automatically on board. So
there you go. And this is why I love working in tech, is I get to use shorthand like that, and everyone knows what I mean.
Yeah, hopefully. So when you do work with leaders who are higher up in their companies and very prominent, what are some of the challenges or experiences that they have that the rest of us might identify with and could learn from how you help them through those challenges?
So the top challenges are people challenges, and it plays out on two levels: other people and yourself. So it starts with yourself, because you can spend all your time figuring out other people, but if you haven't figured yourself out, then it's going to be a waste of energy. I can promise you that. And so if you start with yourself, the way I like to think about it, and this is not my model, but there's a model of leadership that I feel like I have a very fancy diagram. I don't like doing slides when I'm on Zoom, and so this is my very fancy diagram. The model of leadership that I love, I don't think it's trademarked, it doesn't need to be, but is that the leader, a single person, is in the middle. Then there's one-on-one, the next circle. So that's leadership happening between one leader and other people, one-on-one, then teams, and then the business. So you lead yourself, you lead others, you lead your team, you lead the business. And so that all comes down to people. But if you start with yourself, the key is knowing who you are. So this is what I call an identity narrative. This is a story at the highest level. It's the kind of, if anyone's read my book, The User's Journey, for products, I called this a concept story. This was a story that never actually happened. It had no action. It was not a journey of any kind. It was just, oh, a presenter remote. With a presenter remote, I can easily click and advance from slide to slide. Unlike other remotes, these buttons are really easily identifiable with my thumb when I'm not looking at the remote. And this remote is the best remote on the planet. Awesome. That's a story. And that's a high level conceptual story. But you as a person have the same thing as well. So stories on the singular level can play out in ways like, hey, I'm a great communicator and I love, getting on stage and doing this thing. I'm a people person. It can be like stories that define your identity, or it can be stories that hold you back. And the stories that hold you back can be small, like, what did I say earlier when we were emailing today? I was saying, oh, I have a meeting at the top of the hour. I'll need to keep my answers short, but that's not it's not at all my superpower. It's easier for me to write a 150-page book than to write a blog post. So I have a really hard time keeping things concise and answering questions concisely. But I can write a book. And so, for me, if I spent my time feeling sad about, oh, I talk too much, I would never have written a book. I would never have done anything. But if I can instead spend my time as a leader seeing that, you know what, I love 2-day workshops. That's when we really dig in and go deep. 2 days. Oh, I really enjoyed writing a book, something I never said I'd want to do. It took me 150 pages to describe my thesis, but I did it. And I never did write that introductory blog post that I needed to do. So stories can play out in ways that either, move you forward, empower you, and hold you back. But at the core, it's all about who you are, what you want to achieve, the difference or impact that you want to make in the world, what drives you. So the why, like, why does this even matter? What motivates you, inspires you, what things you do, that's just action. And then what gets in your way, because kryptonite, if you think about superhero tales, it makes every story better. Every hero has kryptonite, and that's great. And there's so much psychology behind that. Superhero tales are basically like psychology 101, but in like picture form. So kryptonite's great. What is it? And how do you want to embrace that and use that to move forward? So at the core of it, that's you as a leader, identity narrative. Who am I? Where am I going? Impact, superpowers, kryptonite. Then you can expand that to other people. So stories are co-created. When you have a conflict with someone at work, that's a story. I call those conflict narratives. I have very scientific names for everything. Conflict narrative is a story that's created by two people. You did this, you are this, I want this, you won't give me this. Those are all stories that may or may not be true. So if you can learn how to uncover the real stories and then co-create a better ending with someone, that's how you're going to move people forward, whether it's your direct reports or someone else who you work with. Same thing on the team level. There's a team story. Who are we? What is our function? What are our goals? What is our kryptonite? What are we here for? What motivates us? So on and so forth. Team stories can motivate key players in a team. They can also then expand onto other teams. And so I always like to think in terms of, design team. Oh, engineering hates us. Engineering says, well, product hates us. And then, and they're like, teams have personalities too. And so you can uncover stories and use that to move the teams forward. Same thing with a business. A business has a story, and businesses have conflict with other businesses. And so when people know the real story of a business, that's when they're driven forward. And that you can think about like fancy, sort of high level stuff like, Steve Jobs running a business, or even I love thinking of Dolly Parton. She's actually one of the most successful business owners on the planet. So yeah, what stories do businesses have? And then, I guess it ends there. Then it's what impact are we having on the world? So that's, my very fancy model of how the stories start with the leader first and then expands outward.
I like that. Great, thank you. So this is one of our members submitted questions. How do you stay true to yourself and who you are at work? I'm most comfortable just being myself in graphic tees and hoodies. My company is fine with this as well, but most tend to be more dressed up, wearing business casual even on Zoom. So I tell myself that it's probably better to look more professional and just end up wearing what others wear. I feel the need to blend in. How do I become more comfortable and confident as my true self in my appearance at work? And I think that ties into your story of self and, so.
Yeah, I love that question because it's a great example of stories not being told, but being lived and embodied, which is, I believe, the most effective stories. And so and I think about this idea of clothing a lot, because that is how people read us. And so, like everything else, there's no right or wrong answer. I think if you asked my coach the same question, she would say, if you're going into that corporate setting, you got to dress like, you belong there. And so she would, put that suit on or whatever she needs to feel the part, but that's what she needs to feel the part. And so the rest of the time, like, as she likes to say, she's like a hippy dippy and would have like flowing frocks and stuff. So she doesn't want to have her flowing frocks in a corporate environment, and that's okay. But that's how she feels good. And that's the story that she's telling in order to be taken seriously in certain contexts. For me, I take a different approach, which is, so I got this tattoo probably, I think when I turned 30, I got the tattoo. And the reason why I got that is I remember I had a friend of mine who was sort of playing the corporate game, also in the tech world, but more in a corporate way. And her thing was she had all these tattoos, but she would cover them up because she couldn't show anyone her tattoos. And it was such a thing of like, she could never let her true self be seen at work because it was inappropriate to have tattoos. And I remember thinking at the time, that's so sad. Like, I don't ever want to work anywhere where I can't have what I think is actually a really cool tattoo. Not only that, in tech environments, people see my tattoo. It's a super hypercube, a tesseract. People see that, and it's like nerd litmus test of just like, ooh, can I see your tattoo? And people want to look at it. And so for me, I got tattooed in a very visible place because I thought, you know what, I'm never going to cover that up. And if people can't handle it, then I don't need to work there. And for me, that was sort of how I owned my story, which is that I'm someone who I have to do things my way, but I think you'll appreciate it. And so I will work here unless you tell me otherwise. And it's worked out fine. Same thing with wearing jeans, in certain environments. I just don't want to, I still want to command respect. So I'll wear jeans, but I'll make sure it's done in a way that, looks okay. Or if I wear hoodies, I'm wearing my hoodie right now. It's just, I make sure if I'm going to, a fancy environment, I'm wearing a very nice hoodie or like a cashmere hoodie with very nice wool that looks crisp or something. So I think there's no right or wrong answer to this, but it's really about knowing who you are and how you want to be. We're very lucky because we work in tech. A lot of us, unless you have a corporate dress code, we can play with our identities a little bit and show up how we want to show up. Not everyone can do that. My wife works for city government, and until COVID hit, I think now they're letting people wear jeans to work. But until then, it was like you couldn't, and you couldn't wear sneakers, you couldn't do things. And so in that case, of course, you have to do what everyone says. But otherwise, it's who do you want to be and how do you want to show up? I'm not saying I'm not a jerk about it, but I like showing up as me, not in a rude way. If I think it's going to be rude or offend people, I wouldn't do that. But yeah, how do you want to show up? That's the fancy term for that is leadership presence. And that is if you can figure out who you are as like a superhero persona, what do you want your presence to be? Are you going to be Superman or Captain America? Are you going to be Tony Stark? Or, not saying you should live up to these archetypes, but don't be Tony Stark. But still, like, who do you want to be? They're archetypes for a reason.
I appreciate that. Let's see. Another member submitted question. How do we recognize that we're telling ourselves stories when we're second guessing ourselves and doubting our capabilities? Sorry, cat attack.
Yeah, it's another great question, which is if at any point there's ever tension that you feel in your body about something that you're telling yourself, that's when you pause, check in, and you can just point blank ask, is that story true? And it could be a story you're telling yourself about you, other people, your team, or your business more broadly. And when you ask if it's true, you can either find out right away. And so when I do this with my coaching clients, it might be something like, they might say something like, oh, I would never say that. It's a stupid question and everyone's going to think it's really you know, they're going to think I'm really dumb if I ask that question. It's like, is that true? You can run a very easy experiment. And so so if you think about lean methodology, and I don't mean this in any like, you have to follow this process way, but if you think about the idea about behind hypothesis testing, if you're afraid of something, there's energy there and it's something you can test. So figure out, all right, what's the story I'm telling myself? Is it true? And I'm drawing like a flow chart now, which is, so is it true? If yes, then okay, what are you going to do about it? If no, how are you going to find out? And how can you find out ideally within the next right away or 24 hours? And how can you then expand that to a bigger experiment that won't go longer than 2 weeks? How can you go find out? So if the experiment is, well, I'll try saying something in my meeting tomorrow and I'm going to see how it feels. Great. How did it go? And then you do it again, you do it again, you do it again. And after 2 weeks, you're really clear on if the story is true or not. And that's what I mean by data gathering. And it's a similar thing where you can gather data for yourself or your org or your business, qualitative ways and quantitative ways. And it might just be quantitative, might be like on a scale of 1 to 10, I feel this, I'm a 3, I want to be a 7. It might be, you know, well, we're having a $400 million shortfall this quarter. And I think it's because I'm not being clear with my leadership team about what we're supposed to be doing. And so if I'm more clear, then, okay, so that's something you can start testing in your meetings. Was I clear or whatever? And then eventually over time, similar to product problem, it's not like you can attribute a $400 million goal met to exactly one thing. But if you can really think in terms of, well, what impact does not being clear in my meetings have? What impact does this have? What impact does that have? You can find numbers that are attributable to behavior change. So yeah, you can test everything, experiment with everything. And that's how you know if you're on track or not.
I like that. And it kind of takes some of the emotional response out, or you have other reasons that you're responding in a way that it's the numbers, it's the data, it's the responses, versus just feeling like you're telling yourself a story.
It does take the emotional response out on the one hand. On the other hand, I also encourage anyone I work with to add the emotional response in, because that's another piece of data. And so the 3 important pieces of data that you should always collect in any experience where you're putting yourself out there to gather data is, so there's like the numbers piece, there's and thoughts. I think that went well. I do not think that went well. There's emotion. So I was really nervous. I spoke up in my meeting and I was really nervous. And that's okay. And then you try it again. How did it go? I was a little less nervous. Okay, that's good data to collect. And the third piece is physical data, physical feelings, because that's when you really uncover true emotions. So for example, let's say you're running an experiment in a meeting and you're like, I'm going to try doing things differently today. And then you check in with yourself afterwards or in the moment and you're thinking, how did that go? Oh yeah, that went well. And people were more talkative in the meeting. I think it had a good response, and yeah, I felt fine. And then you check in with your body. Well, how did you feel? And you might be like, my heart was an iron fist and I felt like I had a plate of armor on my chest. And it's like, okay. Good data. That's really important data. So you might say, yeah, that felt fine, but actually it's still really hard for you to do right now. And that's okay. And then you figure out what you want to do with that. Oh, I'm going to keep trying, or no, I'm never going to do that again. That was a disaster. So it's important to have all those 3 filters.
I think that was very a validating expansion on the response. Thank you for that. Another question is, what is the best way to share the user's story when presenting research findings to get stakeholders to empathize and take action?
So I love this question because it ties back all the work I did for 20 years with the leadership work I'm doing now. And so the important piece when sharing user stories, for example, so when in my work, I'll use myself as an example. In my work doing product strategy, which always had a huge research component, presenting what I learned with key stakeholders in story-driven ways was important. So, and I would use whatever tools I felt like the audience would resonate with most. So if it was personas, great. If it was diagrams, great. I didn't care. The story had to be there. I didn't care what the actual format was. Some teams hate personas. That's fine. Then we do something else. I've done live action improv, like stage plays for engineers where they were like, what are these people doing? But they loved it because they would never look at your persona one sheet if you sent it to them or hand it to them. So many ways to disseminate information and get people on board about, hey, these are the stories that users are experience or can experience if we do these things. However, those only go so far if people aren't already bought in to some other kind of story, whether it be an organizational story like, hey, as a business, this is what we're trying to accomplish as a business. That story comes from the CEO or whoever is up on top, or our team. As a team, this is what we're trying to do. Well, that story comes from the team lead or whoever is in charge of that organization or silo. And it's important that, how to put it, if you're in charge, so if you're senior leader or executive and can go top down with what the story is and can be, you can have an impact by then getting people excited about what you're working on and getting people to see the vision and the journey that they can then take you on as an executive. You can do it top down. If you're elsewhere, well, actually, I'll qualify that. You can do it top down, but if you're just doing it top down and not also getting input from people, it's not going to be as effective. And so, if you're just being like, hey, here are the opportunities that the market has, go do this, but everyone else is like, wait, we have a different idea. So as a leader up on top, you have to be listening to your users and listening to your audience internally and figuring out what are their dreams, what do they want to accomplish with our business, and then you meld it all together. So if the story connects, that's how it's going to be most impactful. Ultimately, it's not about, did I do it in a keynote presentation or did I do it in a report? It's like, is the story connecting with people? And if so, it's gonna resonate. If you're not in senior leadership or not in charge of the whole thing, and you're more in the middle or in a more supporting role, like IC role, for example, then it's a similar thing, which is like, if you're just going out and doing user research and then just coming back and saying, hey, here's the user story, this is what we have to go do. If it doesn't connect with everyone else, you're not going to be as effective. So the simple answer is, give a good presentation. Read Nancy Duarte's book on slideology or whatever it's called, on how to give a great presentation, and watch some TED Talks and learn how to do that, and then use that for demos and all of that, and read all the UX books you can, and know how to write up a very nice fancy report and hand it to people, or come up with personas or whatever, user journeys, journey mapping, on and on. But if people haven't bought into it, it's not going to be as effective. And so that's when you need to think like a storyteller and think about, all right, how am I going to actually connect with people? Do I need to have more coffees with people behind the scenes? Do I need to have more one-on-ones with my team? If you're the manager, am I doing enough one-on-one work? Am I finding out what drives them, what motivates them? It's sort of like, I believe stories are systems and systems are stories. And so when you can really uncover what the story is of your system and amplify that and make that happen and bring that to life, that's when you're going to be most impactful in presenting your stories and making what you want to happen. But it always involves other people. And that's the important part.
That's great. Thank you. We have one more pre-submitted question, and then we have a couple in the chat. And I think we're doing okay on time, 12:43. Is that okay, Donna? Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Great. And thinking about recent headlines about the toxic culture at IDEO, how do you handle a misalignment between your company's culture and your own values? The work is great, challenging in all the right ways, but the organization's motivations, moral compass are questionable.
Yeah, and this is a great question as well. And it's a tough one because when I work with senior leadership, we can affect cultural change. Cultural change does come from the top. You can affect change from bottom up, but it has to be bought in from the top at least, and then really made to happen from the top. And so if working with a leadership team who has the power to really affect that kind of change, that's when the leaders I work with would be able to see, hey, there's a disconnect between, but they have to want to make this change. So they have to be coming to me saying, hey, we want to work on our company culture, or we want to make sure that, I get CEOs who come to me who are like, I want to be a better listener. I feel like I'm just pushing everyone away and it's really impacting, team performance, leadership team performance is trickling down. I really need to, work on that. And so if it comes from above and the leader's open to seeing all the opportunities out there, then we can do work to uncover things like, hey, there's a disconnect between what you say your company values are and what I'm actually. So in these cases, I go out and do research. So I still do research. It's actually great. As a coach, I still have the same job I've had for 20 years. I use that Brené Brown model of like, I'm a storyteller researcher. I just go out, talk to people, uncover stories, and then I repeat it back to you. And in this case, it's all towards making you a better leader, a better team, and making you more effective. But if I'm going out and on the ground talking to people and hearing that, hey, the company values are this on paper, but actually this is the culture that we have. And if I'm able to bring that back to an executive and they can see the disconnect, then they can decide what they want to do about it. So that's an amazing situation when leaders know that there's a problem and that there's something they want to change, and they bring in help. Otherwise, when you're not in a executive position to make that kind of power, the best to have that kind of power to make that kind of change, the best thing you can do, honestly, is either expose the issues yourself, organize with other people, have productive conversations with your managers. And I say productive too, because I think that the conflict narratives I mentioned earlier happen from like laterally and happen from above. Like managers are like, my so-and-so, they're careless. I hear that sometimes. They're careless and they're always missing deadlines. It's like when they uncover what the real story is, they realize like, oh, I was giving the wrong assignments. Oops. Or, something like that. But conflict narratives happen from down up as well. And I've seen similar instances where people from below are like, management's out to get us. And then they come up fighting. And that only will elicit equal and opposite force. So this is all like a physics exercise. That's what humans are. You hit me, I hit you back. And so if you can come and expose the story in productive ways, in theory, executive leadership should listen, but it really depends on the company. And so, often it comes down to, and I hate to say this, but if there's a real dissonance and you're not able to affect change one-on-one through coffees, through one-on-ones with your leader, one-on-ones with your team, and then broader group meetings, sometimes if the behaviors of a company or organization go so much against the company's quote unquote, like written down values or your values. So when I define superpowers, values are one of your superpowers. So like one of my values is autonomy. And it's also one of my superpowers. If I use it too much, it's my kryptonite. But if I can't have that in a job, then I don't thrive as a leader in that job. And so I know that. And, for me, that's why I've owned my own business for half my career. It works out well. But if the behaviors an organization is exhibiting really go against your values and superpowers so much and you're not able to affect change, that's when you might have to leave. And we see that happening a lot with a lot of tech companies that are in the news lately. Basecamp, Uber, sometimes Facebook, depending. I know this has come up with IDEO. I mean, it comes up a lot, and it really is about that mirroring of values, company values, behaviors that the organization is exhibiting, and your values. They do have to be aligned. Otherwise, it's going to be an uphill battle, and it's very difficult. And yeah, so I don't know if that's the answer people wanted to hear, but it's hard. It's hard. It does have to come from above. And this is part of why my mission right now is to work with senior leaders and executives, because it has to come from above. Change has to start from, it doesn't have to start from above, but it has to really be made happen from above.
Yeah, you're getting some good agreement in the chat. So I think that's the right thread. Lou had a couple questions. I'm going to pick one that I think ties more closely to what we've been talking about. Is the concept behind leaders leveraging their storytelling a bit like manifesting? Are they trying to manifest something with their storytelling, or?
Yeah, there is. So when you think about storytelling in the sense that I think of it as like the stories I tell myself about myself as a leader, about my team, about my organization, those stories, it is a kind of manifesting. Because if you walk around saying, I'll just use this as an example because it's just like what my week has been. And we're in the process of moving. And so we're looking for a new apartment. And so if you walk around saying, I'll never find an apartment, I'll never find an apartment, I'll never find an apartment, you won't find an apartment. Like there is just so much psychology behind that. Or when you do find the right apartment, you're like, is it the right apartment? I don't know. And so it's kind of actually, it's not a trivial example because moving is horrific, but work is the same thing. If you walk around saying, I'm not detail oriented. I'm not detail oriented. I'm not detail oriented. It's like, okay, what are you? Then I liken it to like, if you've ever played tennis, like you spend all your time focusing on, I'm not going to hit the ball over there. I'm not going to hit the ball over there. I'm not going to hit the ball over there. Like you're going to hit the ball over there. It's just how the brain works. But if you focus on like, I'm going to get it there. I'm going to hit it there. I'm going to hit there. You're more likely to achieve your goals. So goal setting works that way. And it is a kind of manifesting in the sense that there's, if you can see yourself doing something in a year, 2 years, 3 years, just seeing yourself doing it and imagining that story and then coming back to present day, your brain doesn't know the difference between it didn't actually happen versus it's happening right now. And that's the true power of stories, which is, so there have been studies that show that if you're in a movie theater and you're experiencing a movie, and which I hope we all get to do again soon, you're experiencing a movie in a movie theater, your body doesn't know and brain doesn't know if you're actually on screen or not. So your palms get sweaty at the right times, your heart races at the right time. It's as if you're there. And so envisioning a future self for yourself, or a future for yourself or your team as a leader, you're more likely to make it happen. It's just how it is. Your brain can't tell the difference. And that's the beauty of it. So I'm not saying you can be like, I'm going to be president of the United States and then make it happen. Like it has to be within reason. Although, I mean, I guess you could do that too. That's how presidents become presidents. But it's, it should be within reason and ideally a little bit data driven. Like, this is what I want to do in 3 years. I want to be running a world-class organization that does X, Y, and Z. And then you come back and you're like, all right, that's a hypothesis. I like it. How can I start testing this and making it real? So yes, it's all about manifesting.
Great. I think that ties into our last question from Christine that I think a lot of people will be dealing with this. I've just started a new job this month. Should I rewrite my story?
Okay. I just started a new job this month. Should I rewrite my story?
Could I or should I?
So if you just started a new job, here's the story you need to write. And you can do this for yourself. So when I work with executives, I can do it with them, or you can just go do it yourself. And so go out, talk to, depending on the size of your organization, talk to 20 people if you can. Find out what their dreams are, what they've done to achieve those dreams, what's getting in their way, and how you can help them, how you can fit into that. Also, look at yourself. So that's one, the outward part. And then start thinking, all right, how can I really empower people here through my role? Look at yourself. And you can, I've got worksheets on my website. There's the identity narrative worksheet you can download for this, and look at who am I as a leader. And that involves all the pieces I mentioned earlier. What kind of change do I want to affect in the workplace and in the world? What motivates me? What things do I do? What are my superpowers? What's my kryptonite? And so look at yourself. Then compare the two. Make sure that your 360 story is, and then you're talking to people above you, below you, to the side. Make sure that story is aligned with yours, and then figure out, okay, how do I, if your story is good, great. If it's something you want to change, then it's, what do I want my story to be? If the system story is like, we want this and it's totally not what you do, then figure that out. Hopefully it's not totally misaligned, but then start getting into journey territory. And the way I like to think about that is, it's just, you're mapping your journey. I think I have worksheets for that on my website as well. And in mapping your journey, it's as simple as, where do I want to go? And you can pick your amount of time. It could be 3 years, a year, 5 years. You could do quarters. I use this for OKRs as well, quarterly OKRs. Where do I want to go? Where am I now? What do I need to do to get there? And the fun part is then, what might get in my way? And how will I either be aware of those things over time? And what could get in my way is internal hurdles, external, and what can I do to overcome them, or at least just know that they're coming and manage them as they come. So that's the best thing you could do. That's what I call writing your story. And as you notice, that's not a story you necessarily ever tell anyone. You might never tell it, but it's a story that you know and that you embody and that you will bring to life because you're living it.
I love that. And Christine is nodding. So I think you hit everything right on the nose for her. And I just, let's see. Four has a really quick question. What book do you recommend to help guide, support people moving into a job in which they will have a lot of organizational responsibility? Like an ED, a board member, a book, not a film. He's more of a reader.
Yeah. Let me think.
If you want to think about it, you can get a response and I can share it back with everyone too.
Yeah, I know. I feel like I have a blog post coming for that, which is my favorite leadership books. But off the top of my head, I would say Brene Brown's, I forget what it's called, Courageous Leadership, which is great. It's all about, just using vulnerability to affect change, which is like really knowing yourself and the impact you want to have. Another fun one is Peter Drucker's Managing Oneself. It's kind of a classic, and it's not going to teach you organizational stuff, but it's like how to be the best leader you could be. And so those are the two off the top of my head, and then you need to figure out how to apply them. And so there's that. And if you can, I would say, and I'm biased, but if you can get a coach to work with. That's the best thing I ever did when I was in a leadership position. And it's something I still do now. Again, I'm biased. I am an executive coach myself, but it's hard to do. It's hard to do alone. And the best, most successful leaders on the planet, it's a little hidden secret. They don't do it alone. They make it look easy, like they do it alone, but yeah, you can get help.
Thank you so much, Donna. And so I dropped a link to your toolkit in the chat that I hope everyone can find. And then there's also information on working with you as a coach, which I hope everyone will check out. And you have some really great resources on your website. And I thank you very much for coming and spending some time with us.
Of course. Of course, I'm happy we could do this. And yeah, for anyone, if you ever have questions and leadership related stuff, you can reach out to me anytime. I've got tons of resources on my website, and they're all free. So enjoy and be super. It makes me happy.
Thank you so much, Donna. This was an hour well spent. Really appreciate it. And lots of great, check out the chat. There's lots of great feedback coming in. I think others agree as well.
Awesome.
Enjoyed spending the time with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was great.
I'm going to copy and save the chat for any resources as well. So
perfect.
Yeah, thank you so much, Donna. And
of course,
thank you everyone for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day. We will see you in July. Watch the site for more information.
Great.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.